I stood there, fuming, as the HOA patrol deliberately parked their cars across my driveway, blocking access to the vegetable garden that had kept me fed during months of unemployment. Little did these petty neighborhood overlords realize that buried in the fine print of our county ordinances was the one legal detail that would not only save my garden, but unravel their entire crooked scheme. Comment below where you're watching from. The patrol car slowed in front of my house, and my pulse quickened. It wasn't the police, it was worse. The Willow Grove HOA vehicle, painted to look official with silver badges on the doors, stopped right at my garden. I dropped my watering can and rushed outside. "Can I help you?" I called. Out stepped Mrs. Harper, clipboard in hand, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun that matched the scowl etched on her face. She wore a jacket with HOA enforcement stitched on the pocket. "This is outrageous," she snapped, jabbing a finger at my tomato plants. "This used to be a decent neighborhood. 6 months earlier, I'd lost my job as a mechanic when the plant shut down. With bills stacking up and no responses to my job applications, I turned my concrete driveway into a small farm using salvaged wood and discounted soil bags. Every tomato I grew was one less I had to buy. They're just vegetables," I said, keeping my tone even. "For food." Mrs. Harper scribbled something on her clipboard. Section 123 states, "All visible landscaping must be board approved." This looks like a dump. Behind her, I could see her own yard, boasting a gaudy birdbath that I'd bet wasn't on any approved list. "I'll check the rules," I replied calmly. She snapped a photo with her phone. "You've got 7 days to clear this mess, or you'll face daily fines." As her car pulled away, my neighbor Sam crossed over from his porch. "Don't let her push you around, Jake," he said. "She tried to make me ditch my porch swing last year, called it a visual nuisance." "How can they find me for growing food?" I asked, exasperated. Sam pointed to his backyard. "Half the neighborhood has gardens, but not in their driveways. They can't regulate what they can't see from the street. That's why mine's hidden behind my fence." I sighed. "I don't have a backyard, just that shady little patio." Sam frowned. "Then you might be in real trouble. Mrs. Harper's husband runs the biggest real estate firm around. They're trying to flip this whole area." That night, I couldn't sleep. My driveway garden wasn't just a pastime. It was my lifeline while I hunted for work. The 20 raised beds produced enough to slash my grocery bill in half, and I'd been selling surplus at the farmer's market for gas money. I dug out my old HOA handbook from when I moved in 3 years ago. Back then, the landscaping rules were 2 pages long. Now, the updated version Mrs. Harper had dropped off was 26 pages, micromanaging everything from flower pot sizes to mulch colors. Section 123 did mention visible landscaping needing approval, but it specified permanent changes. My bed sat on top of the driveway, not permanent at all. The next morning, I photographed every inch of my garden. Then I walked around Willow Grove with my phone, snapping pics of ignored violations, unapproved mailboxes, lawn gnomes, and, most glaringly, Mrs. Harper's birdbath, spewing water 6 feet high. If they wanted to play by the rulebook, I'd figure out which rules mattered and which didn't. 3 days later, I caught Mrs. Harper and 3 guys in matching green shirts measuring my driveway with fancy tools, slapping yellow tags on my beds. "Excuse me," I shouted. "This is private property." The tallest guy barely glanced up. "HOA regulations let us inspect violations. This garden covers 63% of your driveway, way over the 25% modification limit. There's no driveway percentage rule in the bylaws," I shot back. He handed me a paper I'd never seen. "New amendment, passed last month." But the date on it was today's, not last month's. Were they inventing rules just for me? That night, Mrs. Harper parked across the street, photographing everyone who stopped to buy my tomatoes. When Mrs. Ortiz, the sweet old lady down the block, traded me a loaf of bread for some zucchini, Mrs. Harper marched over. "You shouldn't support rule breakers," I overheard her say. "This used to be a nice place before people turned it into a farm." Mrs. Ortiz gripped her veggie bag. "I've lived here 40 years, Ellen. We all grew food and shared back then. Times change," Mrs. Harper retorted. "Property values matter now." After Mrs. Ortiz left, I found a white envelope tucked into my garden fence. Inside was a $500 check and a note. for your garden supplies. Don't let them win. Signed, a neighbor who'd shell out $500 to save my garden. And why hide their name? I slept in my living room that night, paranoid the HOA might pull something sneaky. Around midnight, headlights flashed across my windows. Peeking through the blinds, I saw Mrs. Harper's husband's sleek SUV idling out front. He was on the phone, gesturing at my house. I caught snippets, prime spot, and once we pushed them out, what were they planning? This felt way bigger than my garden. The next day, a blood-red final notice envelope turned my stomach. Inside, an official letter from Willow Grove HOA demanded I cease all unauthorized agricultural activities or face fines starting at $100 a day, doubling weekly until my garden was gone. It was signed by Victor Lang, HOA president, with Mrs. Harper's name below as enforcement chair. I couldn't afford a single fine. My savings were nearly drained after 6 jobless months. That evening, as I checked my plants, Sam waved me over, glancing around nervously. "They're not just after your garden," he whispered. "My buddy works in city planning. Harper Realty just filed plans for luxury condos here. They can't demolish a whole neighborhood," I said. "They don't have to. They just make it miserable until people sell cheap." He nodded at 3 for sale signs, all listed by Harper Realty. It clicked. The HOA was tanking property values so Harper could buy low, rezone, and profit big. Sam handed me a card. "My sister's a lawyer who fights shady HOAs. First meeting's free." The next morning, I called Lisa, Sam's sister. She listened intently. "This is a growing trend," she said. "They enforce impossible rules, target specific owners, then rescue them by buying their homes cheap. I'll check your county laws." While waiting for Lisa, I set up security cameras with that mystery $500. I had a hunch I'd need evidence soon. That night, at 3:17 a.m., my cameras caught 2 shadowy figures pouring something on my plants. By morning, half my tomatoes were dead, leaves blackened. I grabbed soil samples and called Lisa. "If they used chemicals, that's criminal damage," she said after seeing the footage. Soil tests confirmed it. Industrial weed killer, strong enough to ruin the dirt for months. I couldn't replant. My whole garden was toast. When I got back from the lab, a crowd was outside my house. Mrs. Harper stood in my driveway with Victor Lang and a cop. "See, officer," she said, pointing at my dying plants. "It's a health hazard. Who knows what diseases these could spread?" The cop looked uneasy. "Ma'am, dead plants aren't a police issue." "The chemicals might be dangerous," she pressed. I stepped forward, phone recording in my pocket. "Officer, I've got video of 2 people trespassing last night, poisoning my garden. Here's the soil test. Commercial herbicide, not sold to the public." The cop took my report seriously, reviewing the footage. "Recognize them?" he asked. I couldn't ID them clearly, but their builds matched 2 HOA guys who'd measured my driveway earlier. As the crowd thinned, Mrs. Harper lingered. When the cop was gone, her fake smile vanished. "You're fighting a losing battle," she hissed. "This neighborhood's changing. Smart people are selling while they can." "Why me?" I asked. Her grin turned icy. "Your corner lot's perfect for our development entrance. The sooner you're gone, the better." My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Found it. County Ordinance 479. No HOA can restrict reasonable food cultivation during drought emergencies. We're still under last summer's declaration. Call me ASAP. My ruined garden might be dead, but hope sparked." They'd missed one key law. Now I just needed proof tying them to the vandalism, and I knew where to start.